The winter sun had just begun to rise, spreading a soft golden light across the quiet highway as Emma sat silently in the back seat of the dusty green car. The 7-year-old girl pressed her small forehead against the cold window glass, watching the white fog form with every breath she released. The world outside looked peaceful. Tall pine trees stretched along the highway, their branches still carrying frost from the night before, while the far-off mountains glimmered in pale sunlight. Anyone seeing this scene would think it was a normal morning, a calm start to an ordinary day. But for Emma, nothing felt normal. She sat stiffly, gripping the straps of her pink backpack, so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Her little heart beat fast, filled with a fear she didn't have the words to explain. She kept her eyes on the landscape outside, hoping that if she stared long enough, her mother might somehow appear there like a miracle. The car finally slowed down and turned into a highway rest stop. It was a simple place with a few parked trucks, a couple of travelers stretching their legs, and a small convenience store that smelled like warm coffee, gasoline, and cold air mixed together. Emma's uncle, a tall man with sharp features and tired eyes, parked the car near the side, far from other vehicles. He stepped out quickly, slamming the door behind him, and walked around Emma's side with rough impatience that made her shrink back into her seat. "Come on," he said in a low, commanding voice, pulling the door open. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of anger that made Emma feel smaller than she already was. She slowly climbed out of the car, clutching her backpack, like it was the only thing she could control. The moment she stepped outside, a cold breeze brushed against her face, making her shiver. She looked around carefully. The rest stop seemed busy enough that someone should have noticed her discomfort, but everyone was absorbed in their own routines, checking their phones, sipping drinks, stretching their legs, or staring at the highway, lost in thought. No one saw the fear in Emma's eyes. No one noticed her trembling hands, nor the way she stayed behind her uncle instead of walking beside him. It was the kind of fear that hid itself behind silence. Her uncle placed a heavy hand on her shoulder and guided her toward the restroom area. His grip was firm, almost squeezing, and Emma bit her lip to stop herself from flinching. She knew by now that showing fear only made things worse. She had learned that lesson somewhere between the long, silent car ride and the moment she overheard him talking on the phone last night. She didn't understand everything he said, but she had heard enough to know she was not being taken home, and her mother didn't know where she was. That truth sat like a stone in her stomach, heavy and unmovable. As they walked, Emma noticed something unusual on the far side of the rest stop. A line of police vehicles, SUVs with flashing blue lights off, K-9 unit badges, and crates in the back, were parked neatly. Beside them, a group of officers stood gathered around several dogs. There were big ones, smaller ones, German shepherds with intelligent eyes, Labradors with calm faces, and powerful Belgian Malinois standing tall and steady. 14 dogs in total. They were preparing for something, maybe a morning training session. The dogs looked disciplined and alert, their ears up, tails controlled, bodies poised. Emma loved dogs. She always had. Seeing them brought a tiny flicker of comfort to her heart. They were the only living beings here that didn't seem cold or distant. But her uncle didn't let her look for long. He pulled her toward the restroom and ordered her to wait outside while he used his phone. Emma nodded and stood near a vending machine, trying to look like any other child waiting for a parent. But she wasn't like any other child today. She was a missing girl. She was scared. She felt invisible. And yet, she needed someone, anyone, to see her. She knew she couldn't run. Her uncle was stronger and faster. She knew she couldn't shout for help. Fear held her voice hostage. But she remembered something her mother once taught her during a safety lesson at school. The silent help signal. It was a simple hand gesture, thumb tucked into palm, fingers closing over it. A signal meant for emergencies when words were impossible. Emma hesitated, glancing around. People walked past her without a second glance. Truck drivers talked near their rigs. A woman checked her wallet. A man cleaned his car windshield. Nobody looked at her long enough to notice a silent sign, but she had to try. This might be her only chance. She slowly lifted her hand near her waist, making the signal. She held it there, praying anyone would understand, but the people around her were too distracted by their own worlds. No one noticed. She lowered her hand a little, fear swelling in her chest. She tried again, a bit higher this time, silently begging the adults around her to see her. Not as a child waiting for a guardian, but as a child desperately trying to escape danger. Still, no human eyes landed on her. But then, from across the parking lot, something stirred. One of the police dogs, an older German shepherd with a thick coat and deep amber eyes, lifted his head sharply. His ears twitched. His expression changed. A moment later, another dog reacted, then another. Inside the cage of their discipline, something instinctive was awakening, something powerful, something ancient. Emma didn't notice them yet. She simply kept her hand folded in that silent plea, her heart pounding, her eyes glistening with fear and hope tangled together. In that quiet, winter-lit rest stop, a little girl stood alone, believing no one saw her. But 14K, 9 police dogs did, and their reaction would change everything. The rest stop remained quiet, the cold morning air settling thickly around the parking lot as people continued their routines without any awareness of the silent storm that was slowly forming. Emma still stood near the vending machine, her tiny shoulders tense, her fingers wrapped around the straps of her pink backpack as she tried to make herself look as normal as possible. She kept her eyes down, afraid that meeting someone's gaze might bring unwanted attention, or worse, anger from her uncle. Yet at the same time, she desperately wished someone would notice her silent signal. Every few seconds, she subtly lifted her hand again, folded her thumb into her palm and curling her fingers over it, repeating the gesture she hoped would save her. Her heart pounded with fear that grew heavier with each passing minute. Across the parking area, the group of K-9 police dogs began their morning training preparations. Their handlers, dressed in navy blue uniforms with K-9 patches on their arms, chatted casually about the schedule for the day. Most of them were unaware that their dogs were already sensing something unusual. The dogs, usually obedient, calm, and focused on commands, began shifting in their positions. First, Shadow, a 6-year-old German shepherd known for his sharp instincts, stiffened. His ears snapped upward and forward. His nostrils expanded as he caught a faint trace of fear in the air. He couldn't see Emma clearly from where he stood, but he sensed something that none of the humans around him could comprehend. Fear had a scent, small, delicate, and deeply distinct. And Shadow knew that scent well. Moments later, another dog, a Belgian Malinois named Ranger, let out a soft, uncertain whine. He didn't normally vocalize without a command. His handler looked down at him, puzzled, but Ranger wasn't looking at his handler. His gaze was fixed across the lot, toward a small figure that seemed too insignificant to draw such focused attention. Then Luna, a chocolate Labrador with a gentle face, but strong instinctive awareness, stepped out of formation, pulling against her leash. Her handler tugged it gently, telling her to stay, but Luna didn't respond. She was locked onto the same point as Shadow and Ranger, a point where a little girl stood alone, silently calling for help without a voice. Within seconds, all 14 K9s reacted. Their bodies tightened, their ears angled forward, their eyes sharpened with intense concentration. They didn't bark yet, but their stillness was louder than any noise could have been. Police dogs are trained to notice the smallest details. A shaking hand, a distressed heartbeat, an uneven breathing pattern, the subtle posture of fear. And Emma, standing small and terrified, radiated silent distress strong enough for every dog to detect. One of the handlers, Officer Ramirez, was the first to notice the strange behavior. He frowned as he watched Shadow's body tense like a drawn bow. "What's going on with you, boy?" he muttered, kneeling beside the dog. But Shadow didn't move or blink. His eyes were glued on Emma. He pulled at his leash so abruptly that Ramirez lost his balance slightly. Shadow had never done that in 6 years of training and service. Another handler, Officer Bryant, glanced at Ranger, who was trembling slightly, not out of fear, but out of urgency. His pupils were dilated, his breathing sharper. "Ranger? Talk to me. What do you sense?" Bryant murmured, but the dog didn't look up. His gaze remained locked on Emma, who stood with her small hand folded in that same quiet plea. Finally, Officer Thompson, the senior K-9 handler supervising the training, noticed the synchronized behavior. All dogs were facing the same direction. All were tense. All were focused on the same small figure. And police dogs never did anything in perfect unison unless something was seriously wrong. He followed their line of sight, squinting to see what had drawn such extreme attention. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just cars, rest stop travelers, and the vending machine area. But then he spotted the tiny girl standing alone, her shoulders rigid, her posture hesitant, her eyes scanning nervously. He saw her hand move just slightly, but it was enough for him to recognize what was happening. He had been trained to identify the silent help signal in emergency awareness programs. His heart dropped. He took one step toward her, but before he could take another, Shadow jerked so hard that his collar slipped. In an instant, the powerful German shepherd broke free, sprinting across the pavement with determined speed. The sudden movement startled the other dogs, and several of them pulled hard against their handlers, barking loudly now. Their deep, powerful voices echoed to the parking lot, finally drawing attention from the people who had ignored Emma moments earlier. Emma flinched when she heard the barking, her eyes widening with surprise and fear. She didn't understand why the dogs were reacting, but her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally noticing her. She didn't move, too afraid her uncle might return at any moment. But when she saw a shadow racing toward her, she felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. His eyes weren't hostile. They were protective, powerful, focused. The humans at the rest stop finally turned to look. Travelers paused mid-step. Officers straightened immediately, and even the convenience store clerk stepped out to see what the commotion was about. But none of them understood what the dogs had sensed seconds ago. Shadow reached Emma first, halting in front of her with a powerful stance. His body shielded her from the direction of the car. He didn't growl at her. He didn't bark at her. Instead, he gently nudged her hand with his nose, as if urging her to repeat the signal. Trembling, Emma slowly lifted her hand again. Shadow's reaction was instant. He barked sharply, 3 times, the kind of bark that officers knew meant danger, distress, immediate action. The officers realized this was not a mistake. This was not random. Their dogs had responded to a child's silent call for help before any human had noticed. And it was only the beginning of what would unfold next. The moment Shadow barked those sharp, urgent barks, Emma felt her heart jump in her chest. For the first time in 2 days, someone, or rather, something, was responding to her silent plea. She didn't fully understand why the dogs were reacting, but she felt a small spark of hope flicker deep inside, a spark so fragile she was afraid it might disappear as she blinked. Her knees trembled slightly, and she pressed her back against a vending machine, her small fingers curling tightly around the straps of her pink backpack. The wind felt colder now, cutting through her clothes, making her shiver. But it wasn't the cold that scared her. It was a fear of what would happen if her uncle saw this. And that fear was not baseless, because at that exact moment, her uncle stepped out of the restroom, irritated look already plastered across his face. He was still gripping his phone, mumbling angrily under his breath, but the moment he heard the barking and saw the dogs rushing in one direction, his expression changed. His eyes narrowed sharply, scanning the parking lot until he spotted Emma, and then he saw a shadow, standing protectively in front of her. The color drained from his face. Emma saw her uncle's eyes when he locked onto her, and the tiny spark of hope inside her chest dimmed. She knew that expression all too well. That cold, sharp look meant trouble. She had seen it every time he got angry, every time she hesitated to follow his orders, every time she tried to speak about her mother. She instinctively took a tiny step backward, her heartbeat now pounding so loudly she could feel in her ears. Her uncle marched toward her as if trying to keep his anger masked behind a forced smile, his hand already reaching out to grab her arm. He spoke through clenched teeth. "Emma, let's go." His voice was low, but it carried a dangerous threat beneath the surface. Emma froze, but Shadow didn't. The powerful German shepherd stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and the man, his body stiff, his head lowered, his growl rumbling through his chest like distant thunder. The growl stopped her uncle in his tracks. For a moment, He stared at the dog in disbelief. It wasn't common for police dogs to react without a clear command. He forced a nervous smile at the approaching officers, trying to act calm. "Sorry, officer," he called out. "That's my niece." The dog probably just got excited, but his voice cracked slightly, and even a stranger could see the lies sitting heavily inside his words. Officer Thompson, who had already sensed something was wrong when he saw Emma's earlier signal, narrowed his eyes. He had trained with K9s for over 15 years. He knew how they reacted to threats, fear, and distress, even when humans failed to see the signs. The synchronized reaction of 14 dogs was not random, and the child's body language, stiffness, downward gaze, trembling hands, and desperate stillness confirmed something much darker than a playful misunderstanding. But Emma did not know if the officers would understand quickly enough. Her uncle's hand twitched, ready to snatch her away. She swallowed hard, her throat tight with fear. She wanted to run, but her legs felt glued to the ground. Her mind slipped back to the night everything changed. She remembered waking up 2 days ago to loud shouting between her mother and uncle. She remembered her mother's panicked voice saying, "Give me back my daughter," and the terrifying silence that followed. Her uncle grabbed her in the middle of the night, whispering harshly, "Don't make a sound," as he forced her into the car. She remembered the long drive through dark roads, the feeling of her legs going numb, the sound of her mother's cries fading away behind them. And then she remembered the phone call she overheard while pretending to sleep. "She's a smart kid, but I'll deal with that. We'll be out of the state soon. No one will find us." The words had etched themselves into her heart like a cold scar. She knew she had to escape, but she didn't know how. She was just a little girl, alone, terrified, and trapped. Emma's small fingers lifted again, almost without her realizing it, forming the silent signal. Thumb tucked in, fingers curled over. Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. She wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying from fear that this moment, this tiny chance, might slip through her fingers like sand. And that was when everything changed. Officer Thompson's eyes caught her gesture clearly this time. He had seen that signal taught in countless awareness campaigns. It was the international sign for help, a sign used by people who were too scared to speak, a sign that meant danger. His blood ran cold. He raised his hand sharply and shouted to the other officers, "Stop that man, now!" Everything happened in a sudden burst of movement. Emma's uncle lunged toward her, attempting to grab her before the officers reached him. But Shadow leaped forward, placing his body between Emma and the man, barking with explosive intensity. The other dogs, still held on leashes but pulling hard, erupted into barks that shook the entire rest stop. Emma stumbled backward in shock, her heart racing wildly as her uncle was tackled to the ground by 2 officers. He resisted, yelling, but they restrained him quickly and firmly. More officers rushed to secure him, their expressions dark and focused. Shadow stood guard in front of Emma, preventing the man from even looking her way. Emma froze again, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming shock of finally being seen. Shadow nudged her gently with his nose. His eyes were soft now, full of understanding, as if telling her, "You're safe now. I saw you. I heard you. I won't let anything hurt you." She took a small step forward and placed her trembling hand on his head. For the first time in 2 days, she felt a sense of safety settle around her like a warm blanket. The dogs had noticed what humans missed, and Emma had no idea how much more the truth was about to unfold. Chaos erupted through the rest stop the moment the officers realized that Emma's silent signal was not a child's innocent gesture, but a desperate cry for help. The barking of the K9s grew louder, echoing off the concrete walls and startling every traveler within hearing distance. The once quiet morning transformed into a scene of sudden danger and urgency. Shadows shifted. People froze mid-step, and the heavy tension in the air thickened to the point that even a stranger could sense something very wrong was unfolding. 2 police officers had her uncle pinned to ground, his wrists restrained behind his back as he shouted excuses that made less and less sense with every breath. "She's my niece. Let me go. This is a misunderstanding," he yelled, but his voice trembled, betraying his fear. The officers didn't loosen their grip, for even a second. They had worked with K-9 units long enough to know that dogs did not react as violently unless they sensed real danger. And the synchronized reaction of all 14 dogs meant only one thing. Emma was in serious trouble. While the officers restrained the man, Officer Thompson, the senior handler, moved swiftly toward Emma. But Shadow refused to leave her side. The German shepherd positioned himself between Emma and her uncle, growling every time a man tried to lift his head. It was a deep, controlled growl, the kind trained police dogs use when declaring, "You will not harm this person." Thompson approached slowly, lowering his voice to avoid frightening Emma. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you're safe now? Can you come with me?" Emma looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, still trembling. She didn't speak. She didn't move. The shock of everything happening so quickly had wrapped around her like a fog. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do next. Shadow gently nudged her leg, urging her forward. She took a small, hesitant step toward Thompson, but her eyes kept flicking back to the officers struggling with her uncle. Her fear wasn't that he would break free. She could see they held him tightly, but that someone might somehow believe his lies. She was scared they might hand her back to him. That fear was so deep inside her that she couldn't shake it, even with 14 trained dogs and several officers protecting her. Thompson noticed her hesitation. He crouched to her level and spoke softly, his voice steady and warm. "You did the right thing showing that signal. I saw it. The dog saw it. We're here to help you, okay? No one is going to hurt you anymore." His words were calm, reassuring, but Emma's fear was not something that vanished with few comforting sentences. It was carved into her bones after hours of silence, captivity, and confusion. Meanwhile, the rest stop was filling with people who had taken shelter behind cars and walls when the barking began. Some whispered anxiously. Others simply watched in shock, unable to understand how such a small girl could be at the center of such commotion. Several officers hurried to block off the area with yellow tape, directing bystanders to stay back, while others repositioned themselves around the struggling man. Emma's uncle continued to shout, "She's lying. I didn't kidnap anyone." His voice cracked and grew louder, as though volume could somehow rewrite the truth. But the officers were no longer listening. They were focusing on Emma. Her body language alone told a story more powerful than any words he could invent. Another officer, a woman wearing AK-9 emblem on her cap, approached with a gentle expression. She kept her distance to avoid overwhelming Emma, but crouched down a few feet away. "Hey, honey," she said softly. "We need to talk to you, okay? You're doing great. Can you tell us your name?" Emma opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat felt tight, like someone had wrapped an invisible hand around it. She swallowed hard, but the tension didn't fade. The female officer didn't pressure her. Instead, she nodded understandingly. "That's okay. Take your time. You don't have to say anything until you feel ready." Shadow moved closer to Emma, placing his body against her leg, and she instinctively leaned toward his warmth. Somehow, being near him made her feel less alone. He wasn't judging her. He wasn't questioning her. He was simply there, steady, protective, loyal. Another K-9 Luna strained against her leash, trying to get closer as well. Her handler allowed her to slowly approach. The Labrador gently sniffed Emma's hand, her large brown eyes soft and full of concern. The simple gesture was enough to crack something inside Emma, something tightly held together since the night she was taken. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, slow at first, then streaming faster. She covered her face with her hands as sobs shook her small body. Immediately, the officers formed a protective circle around her. Thompson placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe. We're right here. You're safe now." The crying lasted nearly a minute, maybe more. Every second felt heavy and heartbreaking. Her tears held days of fear. Fear of being lost, fear of being alone, fear of never seeing her mother again. When she finally pulled her hands away from her face, she looked up at the circle of officers around her. She could see their concern, their patience, their quiet encouragement, and she saw the sincerity in their eyes. The female officer tried again gently. "Emma, did you use that signal because you were scared of him?" Emma didn't speak, but she nodded, a small, fragile, Heartbreaking nod. It was all they needed. One officer stepped closer to the man on the ground. "Sir," he said sternly, "you are being detained for suspicion of child abduction, among other charges. You have the right." The man erupted. "This is a mistake. She's lying. She's my—" But before he could finish, Shadow barked sharply, silencing him. It wasn't a random bark. It was deliberate, protective, fierce. Emma flinched, but Thompson quickly placed a hand on Shadow's collar. "Easy, boy," he said calmly, though he didn't scold the dog. Shadow was doing what came naturally, protecting a child who needed him. The officers exchanged glances. Every sign pointed to the same truth. The man was lying. The girl was terrified. Her silent signal, the dog's reactions, the man's suspicious behavior. It all added up. One officer took out his radio and called dispatch. "We need child services and an ambulance on site. Possible kidnapping victim recovered. K, 9-unit response initiated. Send a unit to contact the mother immediately." Emma heard the word mother and felt her chest tighten. Not with fear this time, but with a fragile, rising hope. She hadn't allowed herself to dream of seeing her mother again. Not until now. As the paramedics and additional officers began arriving, Emma stood there surrounded by people who finally understood what she had been trying to say without words. She had been invisible, but 14 police dogs had seen her, and now the entire world was starting to. As Emma's sobs softened into small, shaky breaths, the officers stayed close around her, forming a protective shield that made the busy rest stop feel just a little less frightening. The barking had faded now, replaced by quiet murmurs and the distant crackle of police radios. Shadow remained pressed gently against her side, standing like an immovable wall between her and the danger she had endured. Emma held onto his fur, her small fingers tangled in his thick coat, as though letting go would make the world unsafe again. For the first time in 2 days, she felt something she had nearly forgotten: safety. It wrapped around her slowly, like the gentle warmth of sunlight after a cold, dark night. Paramedics had arrived and parked their ambulance beside the police cruisers. One of them, a woman with kind blue eyes and a calm voice, approached Emma slowly and knelt down a few feet away, making sure not to invade her space. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. "My name is Claire. I'm here to make sure you're okay. You don't have to talk. Just let me check that you're not hurt." Emma hesitated, glancing up at Officer Thompson as if silently asking permission. He gave her a reassuring nod. Shadow, sensing her tension, rested his head lightly against her hip, giving her strength she didn't have moments earlier. Emma let Claire check her arms, her hands, her temperature. She winced when Claire lightly touched a bruise near her elbow. "It's okay," Claire soothed, "I see. You're very brave." The bruise was small but deep, a mark that told its own painful story. The officers exchanged dark looks. Every new detail confirmed they had saved this girl just in time. As the paramedic finished her gentle examination, more K-9 handlers stepped forward, but they kept a respectful distance. They didn't want to overwhelm Emma. They simply watched with quiet admiration, understanding exactly what had happened. Their dogs had not only detected danger, they had protected a child before a single human managed to understand her silent cry. It wasn't common for K-9s to break formation the way they had, but today, instinct and training had worked together in a way the officers would never forget. One handler, Officer Bryant, stepped closer with Ranger, the Belgian Malinois who had pulled against his leash earlier. "Emma," Bryant said softly, "this is Ranger. He noticed you before any of us did." Ranger lowered his head, his sharp eyes softening as he gently sniffed the air near Emma. She reached out and touched his head lightly, almost as if afraid to break him, then quickly pulled her hand back. It was a shy gesture, small, scared, but full of gratitude. Luna, the chocolate Labrador, slowly approached next. Her handler allowed her to sit beside Emma, tail thumping the ground in a slow, comforting rhythm. Emma placed her hand on Luna's head, and the gentle dog leaned into her touch, offering love in a simple, instinctive way animals do, pure, without questions or hesitation. As Emma interacted hesitantly with the dogs, the officers began gathering more information. They checked the man's ID, ran his record, and contacted state authorities. The news was worse than they expected. The man was not her legal guardian. He had a history of unstable behavior and domestic conflicts, and Emma was officially listed as missing. A statewide alert had been issued only hours earlier. The officers realized they had intervened at the exact right moment, minutes before Emma would have been taken across the state border. Officer Thompson returned to Emma, kneeling beside her to avoid towering over her. "Emma," he said gently, "we've contacted your mom. She's safe. She's looking for you. And she's on her way." Those words changed something in Emma instantly. Her breath caught, her eyes widened, and she straightened slightly, as if pulled upward by the possibility of finally being reunited with the one person she wished for every second she had been gone. Tears returned to her eyes. Not of fear, not of pain, but of a desperate hope she had been too afraid to feel. "Is she really coming?" Emma whispered, her voice thin and trembling. It was the first full sentence she had spoken since the officers approached her, and her voice sounded like it was made of fragile glass. Officer Thompson nodded gently. "Yes, sweetheart. She's coming as fast as she can." Emma lifted her hand to her chest, pressing it over her pounding heart. She had imagined this moment so many times in the past 2 days. Imagine escaping. Imagine being found. Imagine seeing her mother again. But now that it was real, she didn't know how to feel. A mixture of joy, relief, fear, and exhaustion poured through her all at once, leaving her small body trembling. The female officer from earlier stepped closer. She spoke with a voice filled with emotion she tried to hide. "Emma, you saved yourself today. You were so brave to use a silent signal. And those dogs, they understood you. They knew something was wrong before any of us did. You can trust them, and you can trust us." Emma looked at the circle of officers around her, each face filled with compassion, each pair of eyes soft yet determined. She realized then that she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't invisible. People finally saw her. People cared. The female officer continued. "You know, these dogs are trained to protect people, but today they protected someone very special." Her voice cracked slightly, and she cleared her throat. "They chose you." Emma blinked, processing those words slowly, and then she did something she hadn't done since the moment she was taken. She smiled. It was small, faint, and trembling, but it was real. Shadow nuzzled her hand again, encouraging her, and this time she wrapped both arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. Shadow stood perfectly still, allowing her to hold him tightly as her tears soaked into his coat. It was a kind of hug that carried both gratitude and heartbreak, a child clinging to the first being who had made her feel safe again. The officers exchanged emotional glances. A few turned their faces away for a moment, hiding the tears forming in their eyes. It wasn't every day that a child held a dog like she was holding Shadow, not out of fear, but out of pure trust. As Emma held on to him, Officer Thompson made a quiet promise to himself. He would stay with this girl until her mother arrived. He would make sure she never felt afraid again, not even for a second. When Emma finally loosened her grip, she looked up at the officers with eyes still glossy from tears, but now filled with something new, faith. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. Her expression said everything. She felt safe. She felt seen. She felt protected. And most importantly, she trusted the dogs who saved her life. The rest stop, once just an ordinary highway stopover filled with travelers and truck engines, had transformed into a place frozen in a strange, emotional silence. The flashing lights of police cars reflected softly on the pavement, casting blue and red glows across Emma's small figure as she sat on a thick gray blanket provided by the paramedics. Shadow lay beside her, his body stretched out in a protective curve, his head resting near her hand, ready to respond to her smallest movement. Every few seconds, Emma would gently stroke his fur, grounding herself with the warmth and solidness of the one creature who had understood her silent signal when no one else did. Time moved slowly, but it was not empty. Officers came to check on her. Paramedics brought her warm water and offered her a soft fleece jacket, and a counselor arrived to stay nearby in case Emma needed emotional support. The air was filled with quiet whispers, murmured radio communications, and soft footsteps. People were careful, gentle, respectful. They treated the little girl not as a case or a victim, but as someone precious, someone who had endured far too much. Emma sat quietly, her breathing steady but shallow. Her eyes kept drifting to the far end of the parking lot, toward the direction cars entered from the highway. Every few seconds, she would glance at Officer Thompson, as if silently asking the same question again and again. Is she coming? Is my mom really coming? And each time, he would offer a small, reassuring nod, letting her know she wasn't waiting alone. Eventually, the distant sound of a car speeding toward the rest stop broke the stillness. Tires screeched slightly as a silver sedan pulled in too fast to be normal. Before the vehicle even fully stopped, the driver's door flung open and a woman sprinted out, stumbling in her desperate speed. Her hair was disheveled, her cheeks wet with tears, and her hands trembled as she searched the parking lot with frantic eyes. "Emma," she called out, her voice breaking, raw, filled with panic and hope crashing together. "Emma, where is she? Emma." The moment Emma heard her mother's voice, her entire body jolted. The blanket slipped off her lap as she scrambled to her feet, her tiny hands trembling, her breath catching in her chest. For a second, she couldn't move. Fear, shock, relief, and disbelief tangled together like a knot too tight to pull apart. Then everything inside her broke free. "Mom!" Emma cried, her voice shaking with a mixture of joy and pain. And she ran faster than her legs had carried her in days, her feet slapping the pavement, her chest heaving, her tears flowing freely. Her mother didn't walk toward her. She ran too. They collided halfway across the parking lot, falling into each other's arms like they were two lost pieces of the same heart finally coming back together. Emma's mother dropped to her knees, hugging her daughter so tightly as if afraid she might disappear if she loosened even a little. Her sobs came in sharp, uncontrollable waves as she kissed Emma's forehead, cheeks, and hair, whispering in a broken voice, my baby, I found you. I found you." Emma's small arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck. For 2 days she had imagined this moment, but in her imagination it always felt like a dream, distant, blurry, almost impossible. Now, feeling her mother's warmth, hearing her heartbeat, breathing in her familiar scent, Emma knew she was finally safe. The fear that lived in her chest finally began to melt away, replaced by the overwhelming comfort of being home. The officer standing nearby quietly looked away, giving them privacy. A few wiped away tears, pretending to adjust their badges or check their radios. Even the K-9 handlers, tough and disciplined, felt their throats tighten. It was impossible not to feel something watching a mother reunite with a daughter she feared lost forever. After several long minutes, Emma's mother finally pulled back just enough to cup her daughter's face with both hands. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? Are you okay?" Emma shook her head quickly and leaned into her mother's touch. "I'm okay now," she whispered. "The dog saved me." Her mother looked up, her tear-filled eyes moving toward Shadow, the brave German shepherd standing only a few steps away, watching the reunion with calm, intelligent eyes. Emma's mother's breath hitched. She rose slowly, guiding Emma with her, and approached the dogs cautiously. She knelt in front of Shadow and reached out with trembling hands, placing them gently on the dog's head. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved my child. You saved my whole world." Shadow's tail swayed gently, and he nudged Emma's mother's hand softly as if acknowledging her gratitude. Other K-9s gathered around Emma and her mother, their heads tilted, their eyes soft, their bodies relaxed. They didn't need words. They understood the moment. Officer Thompson stepped forward then, his voice quiet but steady. "Ma'am, your daughter was incredibly brave. She used a silent signal, a gesture many kids don't even know. And the dogs, they reacted before any of us understood what was happening." He paused, looking down at Emma with deep admiration. "She's very strong, and she trusted the right instincts." Emma's mother pulled Emma closer, holding her protectively. She looked at the officers and the dogs with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice breaking again. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing her. Thank you for bringing her back to me." A few officers nodded humbly. Emma's mother hugged her daughter tightly again, whispering soothing words. Emma leaned into her mother, feeling safer than she had in days. The fear was gone now. She was held by the one person who loved her most, surrounded by the heroes, both human and canine, who had brought her back. Later, as the officers prepared to leave and the rest stop slowly returned to normal, Emma asked if she could say goodbye to the dogs. One by one, she hugged them, Shadow first, then Ranger, Luna, and the others. Each dog leaned into her touch gently, understanding in their own quiet way that this wasn't just a child thanking them. This was a child whose life they had saved. After a final hug, Emma turned to Shadow once more. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. Shadow nudged her hand gently, his eyes full of warmth and understanding. Emma left the rest stop hand in hand with her mother, the world feeling brighter, safer, and filled with hope again. And as the police dogs watched her go, their handlers understood something profound. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they walk on four paws. And sometimes they are the only ones who notice a silent cry for help